Will it? Okay. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Chuck's Rawversations, which it's a lot like Chuck's Raw Reviews, only instead I get to have a guest and we get to talk about raw comments or raw, I don't know, topics. So today, Scott and I, my good buddy Scott Weldon, he's about to introduce himself in just a minute. We're going to talk about the process of making comics, more specifically, our process of making comics. Scott, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Scott Weldon. I'm the writer-creator of Harlan Buck Free Sword that I make with Dino Agor and Avery Ferdinand, and self-published through Weldon Studio.
Awesome. And for that one person out there who doesn't know me, oh my gosh, I'm Chuck Pino. I'm the writer-creator of Belial, Welcome to the Void, Essence House, a bunch of other stuff. I also do an awful lot of editing. That's me right there. Cool. We're back in. Scott, you're actually the one who brought me this idea, and I loved it so much that you had to be my first comic guest when I decided to do this. So we're talking about our processes for making comics. We're going to probably try to get through the whole thing, but let's start with, obviously going to work on our own books. So let's start with Harlan Buck. Where did that idea come from, and what kind of started that for you?
Okay, so to not get too long-winded, because I'm very good at getting long-winded. So
and we only have an hour.
When I first created my own setting, my own fantasy setting, it was pretty generic at the beginning, and I evolved it over time. And I got to this point where I wanted it to be kind of like American fantasy. But my main protagonist that I kept was still a holdover from when it was this high fantasy concept, right? And I was trying to make this one character fits all adventure stories that I wanted to tell. So I could always have the same guy, but any kind of adventure. And in the early 2000s, around 2004, I realized I'm trying to squeeze one person into every box. And it wasn't working. It was actually kind of crappy because it just made kind of an inconsistent character, right? And what I did is I took this one character concept and I broke it down into the different elements that I was trying to put in, all the different inspirations that I was trying to cram into this one character. I actually broke it down into a buddy team and Harlan Buck. So Harlan Buck was the solo guy who was more of the classic tough guy. And then the buddy team had a little bit more of the humor and freewheeling spirit and some of the more nobility side. And so, yeah, I just took this one, tried to be one size fits all character, broke them down into 3 characters, and Harlan Buck became that sort of classic Western tough guy character that I built out of that.
So was it the setting that came first for you or the character?
Actually, they were simultaneous because, like, I was a big D&D geek, right? And I was always the DM. Like, I got to play a little bit, but not very much. And I was always the DM. And for the longest time, I just played in the Forgotten Realms and had fun there, and that was great. But as I was getting into my later teens, I started wanting to create more of my own stuff. And so I started by, like, trying to make my own fantasy world for D&D, right? But funny enough, it never really worked out. Like, I always end up, when I go play D&D, I always end up going back to the Forgotten Realms. I like never make my own setting because I realized I didn't want to be trapped. After a couple of years of working on it, I realized the more world building I did, the more I painted myself into boxes for storytelling. And so eventually, after years of struggling with trying to create the box first, I threw all that out the door because the setting started in the 90s, right? And I did my first short stories for it in like 97. But like I said, Harlan Buck wouldn't come around until 2004, the character. And I hadn't even finished any stories for him yet. And yeah, so what I did was I eventually just got to the point where I was like, look, I got the gist of what my setting is, but I'm not going to world build it. I'm not going to build it out like a D&D fantasy setting because then I'm trapped. Every time I want to go left, I can't because I've already filled it in with the world building. So eventually I decided that my setting could only be for storytelling, and the story would come first and the setting would come second.
It's funny that you did that because you and we have very similar ideas,
right,
and thoughts, and we both have fantasy books, but that's about all that our things have in common. And yet, for me, it was the same thing. setting and character actually came up at the exact same time. Basically, I was thinking, where Welcome to the Void came from was me going, okay, well, my issue was I love magic stuff. I love all that kind of stuff. And I thought, modern day audiences don't like magic. And it seems too kind of stodgy and old. This was pre Doctor Strange, but still, even Doctor Strange seemed like a stodgy character. And so I wanted to make magic new and exciting. And so I was like, okay, cool. I want to take a character like that. Obviously, I'm going to make them younger to instantly infuse that youthfulness in it. Right. That's the easiest way to do it. And then also, let's make it a modern day setting. Again, that way, with the world building and stuff, I don't have to do a lot of work with that. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, it's now. We have cell phones. Yay, team. So the problem with that is that you get to play with all of that world building stuff, and that's extra stuff where now it requires out of me a little bit of extra work, because it's like, all right, I get to have this setting, but it's not interesting enough for people to be excited about. So I really have to focus, I find, on the story and on the characters, because you don't get to, and not that you do at all, but you don't get to lean as much on the fantastical. And of course, your book, let's be honest, it's low fantasy. Like, it's really not a high fantasy book.
Right. And even how I use magic, and and we've talked about it, but and you've also, more importantly, you've read it in the comic books. The way I use magic is it's sidelined. Like, it exists in the world, but it's sidelined. The average person doesn't even know it's real. And that's usually for me, that's the big difference between high and low fantasy. We could have all kinds of debates on what the two differences are, but for me, that's the difference. Is it a common thing or a not common thing? And I think it's more powerful as a storytelling tool if it's not common, because that way, when I hit you with it, it's like an oh shit moment, right? It's this, oh, I didn't see that coming. And a lot of people ask me, like, dude, you waited 6 issues to even mention that there was magic in your world. And I'm like, exactly. Yeah. I don't want you to think it's a common thing. I want you to understand that, when it happens, it's special. That not everybody has magic. There's no magic items in my world. There's only magic people.
Yeah. Thank you to the producers, by the way, who are putting these images up, because anyone who has ever checked out a Chuck's Raw review, I don't have images. So now all of a sudden, I seem professional as fuck.
Yeah. Well, this is as good as it gets for me, is having a cool backdrop.
Yeah, right.
And this is my living room. So it's not like a studio space. This is like literally my shelf in my living room.
So now we have our characters, we have our setting. So I think the next thing is that you start to work on your story, you start to work on your script, and really, I would almost say that first script, I would say it's easier than finding your team. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, well yeah, because the first part is you're just working on your own, right? So you're just doing your own thing, and you're creating all kind of in your own bubble, and you don't need anybody else to contribute to that unless you choose to include them. But once you go to production, you have to find the team that can bring that vision to life, and that finding the right team is a huge challenge. Yeah,
absolutely. So what made you pick your original team? Like, what drew you to your people?
All right, so my first team, well, Dino's been with me. Dino Agor, the artist on the book, he's been with me from the beginning. And at the first 3 issues, my friend Frederick Allison Jr., he did the colors for me. So Frederick and I, we knew each other from when I was doing CK Comics and rubbing elbows with the Scattered Comics guys up in Sacramento, right? And I loved his stuff. And actually, the first day I met him was at a Scattered Comics event at a comic shop. And when I left that day, I looked to Dijon and I told her, I want to work with that guy sometime. That out of all the guys I met today, that's the guy I want to work with sometime. Like, it was instantaneous that I really got a good feel from Frederick. And when I asked him to color the book, I actually asked him, I was like, because he does everything. He does all the different components. And I was like, are you cool just coloring? And he was. And so he basically did it at a buddy rate to help get me on my feet. And then eventually Avery came on. And how Avery came to be is basically Dino suggested him. I asked around in my friend circle, got good tips on Avery from everybody. Everybody who had worked with him had something good to say. So I went ahead and reached out to him and tagged him. Now, Dino and we met just basically on Facebook. When I was doing the CK Comics stuff, I was really prolific. I wrote a lot more than I ever published with CK Comics. And it's why I would eventually go out and make a deal with the owner and creator of the material and buy a bunch of that from him. I bought a lot of the IP from him just because I had done so much work that never got published. But I was prolifically posting that online, like constantly posting, work in progress on Facebook. And Dino saw that and started hitting me up for an opportunity to work with me because he wanted to do something more regular. He was tired of like these hit and miss, freelance gigs. He wanted something a little more long-term, and it would take a while. It would take about a year or so, but eventually the stars aligned and Dino and I were able to make a deal. And the original idea was that we would do 5 issues and then regroup after that. And now we're like looking forward to 10 issues.
So did you actually regroup, or was it like we just kept moving?
We renegotiated his pay rate because both Dino and Frederick gave me buddy rates for those first few issues to help build some momentum and save me.
Yeah.
Because I was still kind of financially in the hole from the CK Comics days. So I didn't have the same resources when we first started as I would about a year later. And so so we renegotiated his page rate and then moved on from there. But other than that, like, we didn't change anything else.
Thank you, Pops, by the way. We appreciate all your love, man. And thanks to the Madness team for checking us out. Oh, and of course, Meredith. Yeah, thank you to her too. For me, so it was funny. I don't talk about the original penciler for Welcome to the Void, but the penciler that we brought in now is is a penciler I've worked with a lot. It's Gregory Warrenchek, and he's going to be coming on the next one. And my reason for picking him was multiple. First off, that guy is quick. Like, he really gets his stuff going. He has a really good animated style. Like, I love kind of how he always makes everyone really articulate.
Right.
And nothing looks static on his pages, which when you're doing a magic comic and an emotionally charged comic, those are really important things. And then I, like I said, I've worked with him on a bunch of stuff. Obviously, I would end up working with him on Belial later on because he was absolutely amazing. But I also worked with him on Dulce, and I'd seen him do some books for Joseph Dewis and stuff. My colorist and my letterer came about because my good buddy Gene Hoyle was like, "Hey man, if you need anything, these are your people," and they came highly recommended. I liked their work, and so I brought them on, and they've been very helpful, even behind the scenes. Sean Barber, I brought in as my inker, and we met in Indie Comic Conspiracy, which is a group. We're still both very heavily influenced by that group, and we're in that group an awful lot. We both administrate it, but I loved his work, and he and I were both working on our first books at that time, and I thought, this is a guy, I love what he does. I like his personality and what he adds. What you do on the page is important, but I've also found what you do off the page is important too. And one of the things that
everything you do reflects on the team, whether you intended to or not.
Yeah, and he is such a stand-up dude. He really does care and try to make it. And even though I call him Buttbeard, he really does just share and care and try to make everything happen. So I was like, yeah, I got to have this dude. And my editor was and still is Ben Cook, who's just a good buddy from back home who respects my storytelling, but also is really good for coming in there and getting into the dialogue and really ripping into things. So, yeah, man, it was getting the team wasn't too hard, but I did find even as I went, like, you gotta play with your team and really kind of try to cultivate it, which isn't easy.
The commonality here is networking, right?
Yeah.
like Dino and I would go back and forth for, like I said, about a year before we actually worked together. You know, Avery was highly recommended. The same thing you were talking about. Like, that's the key. That's what people forget. Like, the odds of finding somebody out the gates that you get along with and you can work well together with and can deliver, you know, and be a person of their word and have a good work ethic and deliver for you, like, that's not easy. Like, it's not easy to find that right out the gates. You need time to network and develop things. And that was one of the big assets for me of actually starting with other people and kind of like riding their coattails and tagging along with them and learning the ropes a little bit. Was it gave me that year or so to network and to learn how to network and to meet people and to kind of be able to gauge who I thought would be cool to work with and who I'd rather not work with. So yeah, networking being the key.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's a huge deal, and I think that often, I mean, hell, that's partly why I hired you as my letterer for Belial. I was like, I really love what he brings to a team, and you know, not to be a dick about it, but you were a little, not even in a bad way, but you were a little rough when it came to lettering because there were certain things that we just didn't know. Right. And it was some tough love that we needed. And that I feel helped make me, not only help make the book better, but it helped make me a better creator. So that when I moved forward, like at the time, I remember being like, man, Scott's being such a dick. What the fuck is up his ass?
I warned you. I warned you.
I know you did. But when I got out of the situation and I was able to look at future projects, I was like, no. He was a professional. Like there were certain things that he required in order to make a good book. And if I want a good book, I need to fucking listen to that stuff and make it happen. And so I appreciate that. You know, you have to be honest with yourself and say, like, this was my first take on it, because to just say that we went through and everything was hunky dory and everything was great, that's not how it went. But Scott and I are still good buddies because I respect what he brought to the team, and I understand that he wasn't wrong. And so it was important for us to get that.
Right? You know, I think what happens is, as artists, we're so invested in what we do. As creators, we're so invested in what we do. It's extremely difficult to take criticism not personally, right? But, you know, and most people do. They'll take that criticism personally. But I wasn't trying to be personal when I was critiquing what we were dealing with. I was trying to be like, look, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Because that's the whole thing. I can be a pretty laissez-faire, like, seat in my pants kind of guy. But when it comes to something you're going to put your name on and put out into the world for people to see, like, I want it to be good. And, you know, it's like a light switch flips for me, you know, like this usually me being like, hey, good enough for government work, you know, fake it till you make it. Like, I mean, I kind of coast on a lot of things. I'm like John Stockton from the New York Knicks. Sometimes I'm on and sometimes I'm off, you know? And I feel like I'm one of those guys that can play to the level of their team right up until I'm invested, right? Once I'm invested, and comics is something I'm invested in, and then it's like, nah, I only want to do good comics. Like, you know, I already did my time in the trenches, you know what I mean? Where I was just doing what somebody else wanted. And now, like, you know, I'm doing it for myself. So if I'm doing it, I want it to be good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I absolutely feel the same way. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate the love. That's amazing. Looks great. Yeah, no, dude, his books are amazing. Like Harlan Buck. One of my favorite things, just to go off on a tangent for a minute, one of my favorite moments of this year has been becoming a part of the Harlan Buck team, because I came in as a fan, and I actually remember the night I was at poker. I think issue 4 had just come out, and you were like, yeah, so issue 4's come out. If you want to buy them, it's this much for all 4. And I was like, that's it. And I'm like already like well into my cups. I'm not drunk, but I'm definitely feeling it. And I was like, I've heard only good shit about Harlan Buck. I'm buying them all. And like, I didn't even look at how's my bank account. Should I be spending this money? And so I remember telling my wife the next night, I'm like, I just bought a bunch of comics, so hopefully we can afford it. But I got them. I fell in love with them. I talked about them right away, and I've been talking about them every single episode since.
Well, the best part is you weren't the only one in your house that liked them.
Yes, my wife is a huge fan too. She loves it as well. And again, we're both fantasy heads.
Yeah.
So enjoying it and all that. She actually saw the new one. She's like, I don't want to read it yet. And I'm like, what? I was almost offended. Like, why would you not want to read it yet? She's like, because I don't remember the other ones. You need to unpack them, get them all for me so I can read them all over again. I'm like, yes, ma'am. I respect the crap out of that.
Yeah, you know what's funny is one of the biggest compliments that I've gotten, and I've gotten it more than once, is there are a handful of people that have told me that when they get a new issue, they go back and reread the whole run, the entire run, and then read the new one. And that, come on, man, rereadability, that's the thing. If your stuff's worth visiting more than once, and it's not just read it once, pack it up, and put it away, and they're done with it, I don't know how you can get much of a better compliment than people are willing to reread your material again and again.
Yeah. And Phil's right. Greg does do great work. Amazing work. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I feel like I've been really blessed with how the indie community has kind of rallied behind my book, and like my fellow creators, like my peer group, they really are complimentary of what our team puts out. And like when I'm in my doldrums and, doing my creators, oh, woe is me that we all go through from time to time, it's usually my fellow indie creators giving me compliments that pulls me out of it. Yeah.
And that's the nice thing about the community, right? Like they've got your back, and and they genuinely enjoy what we do. Like that's right. Nice.
The key is there's a difference between platitudes and rah shit. Like, hey, you're awesome, keep going, don't quit. That's just surface. And somebody going like, no, like, like a great version of what I'm talking about of it being sincere versus, platitudes is Sean Mack doesn't read non-superhero comic books very often. So if he's reading your book and it's not a superhero comic book, then you're doing something right in Sean Mack's eyes, right? Like, so you hit something that allows him to break his normal box and go like, hey, normally I just do superheroes, but this is awesome. I'm gonna support it, and then they actually like it and come back for more. That's just a good example. Or like, I have friends that are also creators that won't let me tell them my work in progress. Like they won't let me talk to them about what I'm working on because they're like, no, I don't want spoilers. Like I want to be a fan. I want to enjoy it as a fan when it comes out.
Now I feel like a bad fan because I was the guy who was like, I'll take a spoiler. Like, let's do it.
But yeah, but different people are different, right?
Yeah. I think for me, and that's why you and I are having this conversation, is we love the nuts and bolts. Like we love talking and going together over that the process stuff and going, ooh, okay, so why are you doing this? Like recently, I think this last one was issue 8, right?
Right.
So you were having an issue with issues 9 and 10, and like which one should go where, and the stories and all that. And I loved being a part of that conversation and watching you kind of, because I only know so much and I only want to know so much. Like I know probably more than a lot of other fans, but I love when you bring me in there and I get to hear that stuff and really be a part of that, which is again why we're doing this.
Yeah, well, like we talked about when we were discussing whether or not how we were going to approach this conversation is I'm the kid who grew up loving the Star Wars movies and loving how they made the Star Wars movies behind the scenes, how they, did all the special effects. And I could detach. I could watch the Star Wars movies and just be completely immersed in the fantasy, and then go watch the behind the scenes creation of Star Wars movies and be completely sucked in and nerding out over the miniatures and over the sets and over the matte paintings and over the concept art, and then go right back and watch the Star Wars movies, disconnect from all of that process and enjoy the fantasy again. And so I grew up that way. So I still love both. I love process and I love the actual finished product.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the force field underneath the old speeders and stuff in the first movie. It's just like Vaseline or something on the screen.
Yeah. Or how they paint in all the blasters after a fact. Yeah.
Exactly. So you and I we attacked our series in very different ways. And I really respect the way that you did it. And now, like, looking back, it's probably how I would want to do it. But you came at it with, all right, I'm gonna tell. Well, the first one was a two-parter, but for the most part, you were just kind of telling like one part, like one shots in that universe, so anyone could kind of pick up an issue and enjoy it.
Right.
And then after about issue, I think it's 4 or 5, you suddenly go, I'm branching out. I'm making it more of an arc now.
Right. The key is I wanted, especially with the first wave of books, I really wanted it to be classic comics where like anybody could jump in with any issue. And I think for me, like, people feel like everything needs to be an epic, and I don't. Like, I like Monster of the Week episodes. I like episodic storytelling. And for me, I was following the model that I enjoyed from Chris Claremont's run on X-Men, which was you could have these episodic adventures, but it was the growth and development of the characters over time that really mattered. So, like, the only reason I opened with a 2-part story was to sell number 2s. Like, I could have easily done a one-shot first issue, but I really wanted to encourage people to buy number 2 because we all know about the number 2 curse, right?
Yeah, that's really smart, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was like, so I'm not going to give them an end at number 1 because I don't want them to buy it and walk away. I want them to buy it and then come back for more. But then after that, I went 3 issues in a row that were single issues that you could buy one and walk away. And I would sales pitch people at cons that would be like, I don't know if I want to pay $10 for the first 2 issues. I was like, well, you can get the 3rd issue. It's a one-shot story, complete beginning, middle, and end, and you're not missing anything. You can jump in right there. And so that would be, then I would just migrate as each issue came out. I could do that. Well, why don't you try the newest one? Like, I didn't have to tell them to start from the beginning. And I didn't even put numbers on the covers to help break the psychology of starting from the beginning and binging, because we live in the era of binge culture, right? So as soon as if I were to put numbers on them, I'd just sell number 1 over and over and over again. And I didn't want to. I wanted proof of concept. I wanted to prove to you that you could jump in with any issue. And then if you like it, go back or come back and buy more. But what's great, and you know this because you've been reading them all and you've been reading them in order, if you read them all and you read them in order, you pick up on more stuff over time, and you do see that there's connections there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah was talking, she's talking now about how she loved reading tons of comics and bought. I wish I had $100 to spend in a comic shop in the 90s or at any point. But no, I love that you love that. And then earlier on, Sarah was talking about how she loves the nuts and bolts. And I think a lot of that has to go with the fact that, and this isn't a bad thing, but some of us are creators and some of us are enjoyers. Right. And sometimes you can be both. Certainly, if you're a creator, you hope that you are both. I know we know those people who are like, I'm making, and this is my thing, and I don't care about anything else. And it feels very selfish, and I tend to not enjoy that person as much.
Yeah, but there's also creators that, like, they don't read comics anymore because they make them, and like somehow that burns them out. Like, by creating comics, and they no longer get as much joy out of comics, or write books, and so they don't read as much as they used to, or whatever. Yeah. But I'm very much like that Stephen King mindset that, like, if I'm making comic books, I need to be reading comic books. Like, I need to absorb the medium that I choose to work in, and I need to find good versions of the medium that I work in so I can be inspired and learn new things, and and get excited about the medium that I'm a part of.
See, I worked at a burger place for over a year, and every day for lunch, I worked there full time, and every day for lunch, you got a free burger, and I ate burgers for a fucking year. And at the end of that year, I was still gonna eat their burgers because they were so damn good. So yeah, I'm not that dude. Like, if I love something, I'm gonna love it, and I'm gonna keep going back to it and keep wanting to do it. So I guess it's not necessarily hate, but it's more just like, I don't understand, if you're creating something, how you can't enjoy all of it. You know what I mean? Like, obviously not every story is for everybody, but
we're all built different. I mean, I'm the same person that, like, I've watched the original Star Wars trilogy innumerable times. I can't tell you how many times. I've literally lost count how many times I've watched them. Yeah. I was teasing Kyron, Like he's like, I watched those movies like X number of times, like, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 times. I don't know what he said. I was like, really? That's it? That's all you, whatever, rookie. You know what I mean? Like, I can consume the stuff I love over and over and over again, but some people can't. Like, they're one and done. You know, they just, which is why I take it as such a compliment when somebody will reread my comic books, right? Because that, like I said, it just takes it to a different level, that it's good enough to come back for more of the same, like that you've already read.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Another thing that's interesting, that's different about us, is that I have decided that I'm sticking to my guns. I've wavered. I've thought about different things, but I keep coming back to, I'm just sticking with one comic book. I'm going to do Harlan Buck, and this is my flagship book. And you, however, are like the king dabbler. So like, how do you find a way to focus on your baby when you have so many pies that you have your thumb in?
The honest answer is I don't. I'm not as good at it as I want to. I tend to focus more on my clients than I do on my own stuff. I'm kind of a martyr. Like, that's sort of my personality. And so that's something that I'm trying to get out of and learn and go, no, you gotta, Chuck, you got in this to make your own shit. You need to get there. And so I'm having to kind of whip myself into it. But it reminds me of how I would socialize, like even at high school and stuff. I had a general group of friends that I hung out with, but like at lunchtime, I would move from one group to another, to another, to another, because I just loved being a part of it all. And I loved seeing all the different styles and the different types of people and all that kind of stuff. And so it's the same with this. Like, now when you come to my booth, you don't get Welcome to the Void. You get Welcome to the Void. And you're going to see Belial, and you're going to see Harlan Buck, and you're going to see like Dulce and all these other amazing books, because those people have also given me comps and I get to sell them too. I haven't decided if I'm going to sell my Harlan Bucks yet. We'll see.
Don't worry about that. I just sent you like a little taste test. Like when the con season like exists again and you're able to actually go out to shows and be a huckster, yeah, I'm going to send you some books.
Oh, cool. Because honestly, I was like, 3 books? Because one is definitely for me. It's not going anywhere. So do I want to like put $2 in my
one to save? That was my thought process.
I appreciate that. Well, and the other part of me was like, you know what? Maybe this is a book that I'm going to give one away to a friend or something, to try to like, hey, man, I know you like this kind of stuff. Why don't you take one of those? Which I think is another, you see it a lot in novels, where someone will have this big library of books and they'll be like, hey, I think you would like this. And I think that's something that we should consider with comics too.
Well, I've actually done that. I've actually given issues away every once in a blue moon as a promo. And I think that's one of the perks of my book being episodic, in the way that it's episodic, is I can give away whichever issues I have the most in stock and am not worried about like running out of, and know that like I've got this issue to spare. Here, it's a standalone issue. You can try this one out, you know? And yeah, so I've done that a handful of times, because I figure if they do take the time to read it and they end up digging it, they might come back for more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm not really an episodic guy. If it's a one shot, it's a one shot. Like, it's there, it's done. I'm walking away. I got other stuff to do. I have a million Welcome to the Void stories in my head. I have all of Belial, like all 4 or 5 issues where I'm like, no, this is how it's going to end. Like, I already have that set up. It's how I think. So I guess that moves us on to the next part, and that is, you've got your first issue, you've got a couple issues out or whatever, you're doing your thing. How are you looking forward? And how are you kind of moving? You know, like, I have a couple issues going on now. What am I leading up to?
I always operated under the assumption that I won't ever have to quit, which I know that that's not necessarily true, but when it comes to the creative process, I always assume that I'll be able to do this forever, because Harlan Buck was designed to be a slow burn, a long haul. I tell everybody this all the time. When I was on JD's show, I said the same thing. Do not do an ongoing indie comic. It's stupid. It's stupid.
It's a terrible idea.
It's a terrible plan. It's a bad business model. It's not financially smart. The only thing that saves me is the fact that, like I said, that it's episodic and that like I get good word of mouth. But the truth is, that's what I wanted to do my whole life as a kid, was tell an ongoing comic, just like the old X-Men, where you went for years and years telling stories about the same characters, and you watch them grow and evolve as people. And sure, a classic story, 3-arc story, beginning, middle, and end, is about change, right? It's predicated on change. They start one way at the beginning, and at the end they're different. Well, yeah, true, but that's not as cool to me as the slow burn, watching a character and it not being just this one 3-day event in their life that changes them, but a series of events over time that really forms and evolves the character into who they become. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I just pretend like I'm going to get to tell all the stories that I'm going to tell, even if that's not true. And I have, and we talked about this privately, I have like these certain scenes in my head that I know are going to happen, or these certain events in my head that I know are going to happen. And they're not necessarily stories per se. They're just moments, right? They're moments between the characters, or evolution of the character, like something that turns them onto a new path or whatnot. And I want to reach those points, but then I'm always thinking, all right, well, how do I set that up? How do I get there? How do I make that have impact when it happens? So like a great example of that is, if I want to have an emotional point between two characters and I have this scene in my head where, hey, this is going to be a big emotional impact. This is not in the story, but let's pretend I wanted to have somebody close to Harlan die in a dramatic fashion, right? Well, if I do that in 2 or 3 issues, it doesn't carry any weight, in my opinion. I haven't had time to get you to really understand their relationship. I haven't had time. I mean, if you're a super great writer, yes, you can do that, right? But let's assume that I'm just a mediocre writer for these purposes.
We'll just assume.
And so my point is like, but if I build that up over 10 issues and then have that emotional moment, and you're not going to necessarily see it coming. It's not, I won't have to have led this breadcrumb trail to this for you to see it. I could kind of spring it on you after you've warmed to this character that I've killed, if like I said, which is not on the agenda, but let's pretend that it was. Now all of a sudden it matters. Now I get the hate mail, right? I can't believe you killed so-and-so. Well, that's what I want, is I want that reaction. I mean, I haven't done anything to deserve it yet, but hopefully I will. But that's the point. The longer I have to build you up and get you invested in these characters, the more impact those moments will have when I get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when you were talking about how you build stories and whatnot. For me, especially with Welcome to the Void, like Belial's a different animal, because Belial was a story that was brought to me, and then I took and extrapolated and built on it. But Welcome to the Void is very music based. Let me just look at this. Giving away as a promo is perfect. It's just like someone giving a person heroin once they've tried that. It's absolutely true. Comics is a solid paper version of heroin. That's a very good way of putting it.
At least we hope it is.
Yeah. Well, it is for us anyways. Right. I know I've spent an awful lot more money on that than drugs. But for me, like Welcome to the Void is also like, not only is it about music about magic, but it's also my personal connection to music.
Yeah.
And so every issue, it has a song title, and that's because that song title, when looked in a certain way, kind of describes the issue. And I have that going in my head for a long time. And what's been really neat is I'll be in the car driving, and I'll hear a song, even a song that I haven't, done anything with, and suddenly a Welcome to the Void issue will come out, and it will totally wrap around that song. And what's been really cool for me is that I don't even have to write that stuff down anymore, because as soon as I hear that song, boom, that's back again, and I'm like, oh crap, yeah, I still have to write the story.
It's that connective memory.
Yeah, and so it's been absolutely amazing. So even the first several issues I already had, and sometimes I have to fight with myself, like which song am I going to use for this one? And sometimes the song comes first, and the song is what created the whole story idea. So
yeah, it's fun. Music helps a lot of writers. I see a lot of writers talk about like and artists too, and they'll talk about like, hey, what do you listen to music wise when you create? And I'm like, nothing. I feel like I'm the odd man out, that music isn't my mojo.
Well, was music much a big part of your life before you created and outside of creation?
But music is separate. Like I listen to music too, and I listen to a lot of music. And funny enough, like I'll listen to Alicia Cara songs, and I'm like, so Harlem Buck's a 17-year-old girl? Because like I could totally see him at that party not wanting to talk to anybody and wondering what the hell he's doing there. Like, is Harlem Buck a 17-year-old girl? Because she's got me thinking he is. There's actually like 3 of her songs that I associate with Harlem Buck. It cracks me up.
Well, but she doesn't have to be a 17-year-old girl. She's just a similarity.
Right? So I'm making the association backwards. I'm associating music I hear after the fact to the stories and characters I've already made. You're using it and it drives you forward.
Often it does, yeah. The first title, Into the Void, that was a backwards, where I already had the name of it, and then I was looking around for songs that would work, because a lot of the upcoming issues had songs attached to them.
Right.
And one of my favorite bands, and the thing is that it's not just music for Welcome to the Void, it's metal music specifically.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about metal, the first group you come up with as a metalhead is Black Sabbath, because they're effectively considered the godfathers, the creators of metal. And so they have a song called Into the Void, and it very much had a very similar feel to this issue. And I was like, okay, great. I had the idea for my comic. Listen to Grave. Yeah, see? Whereas, you can listen to music and that can push you forward, or as you've done, it can certainly, you can read it or listen to it and go, oh yeah, all right. I see how this 17-year-old girl has a similar mindset to my 35-year-old anti-hero.
Right? Yeah, just my old Western gunslinger archetype in a fantasy world with a 17-year-old pop singer mentality. Okay, yeah. It's weird though, but it's true. Like, because the truth is all this stuff is universal, right? That's the thing. Is emotions a universal thing? We all feel similar things. But I noticed another thing that you have that's different than me is I don't really do humor much, and you bring humor into your stories a lot more than I do, and I don't know why that is, because I love humor like in films. And in books, and I like humor, but I find that I barely touch on humor. Where you like something like Belial is like humor is a core part of it.
Yeah. So for me, humor is a big part of who I am. Like it really is. When I was growing up, my favorite shows, like I grew up and when I was young, I was like, oh, He-Man and all that kind of stuff. But once it hit 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, I was going to go sit down and I was going to watch Cheers and Night Court and all this kind of stuff. And I did that from a young age, and that never kind of stopped. Sitcoms and comedic movies and all that kind of stuff were a part of what I did. And I ended up, when I left school and went out into the great big world, I worked as an improv actor for a while. I did a lot of improvised comedy and stuff. And so comedy kind of became a part of everything I do. It's my defense mechanism. A lot of times if someone's coming at me, I'm like, all right, man, jokes are coming out. I'm going to blast because that's the only way I can deal with this. And if I'm sad or hurt, I'm going to make fun of something else to kind of get my headspace out of there. So comedy is just so infused in what I do that a lot of times, even when I'm not trying to be comedic, it sneaks in there.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a wit guy. Like, I'm not a joke telling guy, and I think that's kind of the thing for me when it comes to writing, right? Is in writing you're setting up a gag or you're setting up a joke. And that's not how my personal humor works. I'm not that great of a joke teller, I'm not that good at, like, despite opinions of him, Bill Cosby is a great storytelling comedian, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. A guy who could tell you a story and build that story up and then your balls laughing, right? I loved that approach. But I don't know how to be that structured. Like my comedy, my personal humor is not that structured. So therefore, writing humor doesn't really come naturally to me because my natural humor is wit. It's sarcasm. It's a smart aleck comment, you know, or playing the straight man. Like I love nothing more than to have people absolutely confused on whether or not I'm being serious. Like I find that hilarious as shit. But putting that in a book is not easy to do. Writing comedy is freaking hard.
Yeah. No, it's true. Michael Odin says it's because Chuck is made of 99% sarcasm. You're not wrong, dude. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, it's really about who you are, what you kind of focus on and enjoy. Yeah, and for me, it's comedy, and writing comedy and all that kind of stuff. It's like I said, it's been ingrained. It's something I do. It was funny today. I was writing some more Belial, really trying to get that issue done, and I knew that there was a joke I wanted to tell, and yet the joke wasn't there, and so I'm bouncing off jokes from my wife and from my oldest kid and all that, and we're just kind of coming at this one thing, off and on, like back and forth constantly. This, that. You know, what are we looking at? What's working here? Until finally we said one thing where we all started dying laughing. We're like, that's the one.
Yeah.
And so it's, you want to say it's natural, but there's also like just a natural wanting it to be a part of it. Like even right now they're showing stuff from Essence House. And Essence House is very serious, but there were moments where I was like, sorry, this part's going to be funny because it felt natural, and that's who I am. And regardless of who you are, humor is a part of your life.
Yeah, and one, it helps break the tension as a storytelling tool too. I think for me, like there's things in my comics that I think are funny, but I don't necessarily think anybody else will pick up on as being funny. If that makes any sense to you? Yeah,
it makes sense. But I've seen the humor in your books, and I do appreciate it.
Like a lot of things, it's subtle, right? It's not like real. Like I said, I don't set up gags or jokes very well. What I've started to realize, I think, in this last year is I thought I was an action adventure writer. Like I wanted to do action adventure, like heroes. Like that's all I've ever wanted to do. It was heroic fiction, right? But I'm starting to think, but I think technically I'm a dramatic writer who does it in action adventure stories is what I'm starting to feel like.
That's really funny because I'm going on the same journey and realizing the same thing because I'm a fantasy guy and I was like, oh, cool. And, we both enjoy that. So I was like, fantasy, but none of my books are straight fantasy. Like nothing I've written except for one that I have coming out now. And it's because I forced myself to do some fantasy because someone was there was an artist that was saying, I really want to get out there more. And how would you do that? And I said, well, you could work with someone and do a small 4-page piece and throw it in an anthology and you officially publish and you have something to show off. And she was like, oh, cool. Well, now I got to find an anthology. And so I thought about it and I went, let me see your work. And she showed me her work and she had a lot of like really nice unicorns and stuff. I was like, okay, why don't I write you a fantasy? My wife's writing a fantasy. I can write it in our world, have some fun. She's like, okay, cool. And then I went, okay, but I have to challenge myself. And that's been, I think, the big thing about my comic writing time is that I just want to challenge myself.
And I think that's something we have in common is we're not content to just rest on our laurels.
I don't want to be comfortable. Even like editing. I had a porn star walk up to me once and she was like, hey, and I didn't know that it was, pardon?
I want my money back.
Hey, you let me into your OnlyFans. I'm in there. No, but she shows up and I didn't know at the time that she was a porn star. And she's like, oh, yeah, I see that you're an editor. She saw my banner here. And she says, I'd love for you to work with me. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm interested. What do you do? And she hands me her card and there she is naked on the back. And I'm like, oh. And she's like, yeah. I want to do adult comics. Are you into that? And I'm like, I'm not your audience, but I want to try something different. So, okay, fine. It never happened because her real work makes a lot more money than comics, but I was open to the challenge. Yeah, right. But yeah, she she was really interested in that, but it didn't happen. But the other woman, she wanted it, and I said, I need to do a challenge because fantasy is not a challenge for me. So I made it a children's book, which I had never done a children's story. And having Chuck do a story where it's like, oh, I don't get to say fuck and I don't get to be rude. All right, let's tie those wrists together and see what happens. And I think I made a really delightful, fun little 4-pager that we're hoping to show off sometime in the next couple months.
Yeah, what's interesting is, see, that's another thing is we're back to like we challenge ourselves, but we do it in different ways, right? I'm trying to figure out how to keep elevating the same story and the same characters and keep it growing and getting better. And that's a specific kind of challenge. And then your challenge is how can I take on different things, Yeah. But I'm doing different things. I'm just putting them all in the same project. Like I'm going, how can I, like I was thinking really hard the other day. I was like, I need to have a horror issue one day, and try and do a scary Harlan Buck comic. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's the kind of things I think about, because one of the things when I created my setting, one of the ideas I had, and one of the reasons I picked fantasy, it's not because fantasy is my all-time favorite genre. I love all kinds of genres. It's because I have the most freedom. But I made this deal with myself at the beginning when I decided that I was going to be a fantasy writer, quote unquote, that the idea would be create a setting where I could dump all my influences into it. Because at the end of the day, genre's packaging. Genre's the sugar-coated outer layer of a cake. It's not the substance. The substances are the type of stories you're telling, are the characters that you're, bringing to life.
Your themes.
Yeah, exactly. That's all the meat and potatoes. Like the genre is just the way you package it. And so that was an important thing to me. So like I really wanted to include, noir and war stories and westerns and superheroes and all of the things that I love, but all in one setting.
Yeah.
And so that's where I try to challenge myself is how do I keep making stories that are a little bit different and not completely the same formulaic tough guy adventurer goes on an adventure next. Tough guy adventurer goes on a tough guy adventure. And so that's where my challenge comes from. But like I said, yours is like, how many different pies can I bake? And I'm like, how can I bake the same pie a lot of different ways?
Well, but isn't it kind of the same challenge though? Like we're really doing the same thing, but in completely different ways. We're both trying to challenge ourselves. We're both trying to hit as many genres and work on as many different things as possible. The difference is my focus is I'm not focused. I have a lot of different things that I'm playing with, and you're Mr. Laser.
Yeah, I have to be, because I found that as a creator that if I were to do what you were doing, I'd get nothing done.
Yeah.
Like I need to be able to focus on one thing, because the more I allow myself to be distracted, the harder it is for me to get anything done. So
and I find, I find that too. So I get that.
Yeah, I learned that. It took me a long time. And it was in that early 2000s period where I was like, dude, I got to stop trying to do my superhero story and my science fiction story and my noir story. And I'm like, I just need to pick something and do that really well, because I'm just spinning in circles and changing gears and not actually getting anything done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't know if I'm allowed to bring this up, but recently you were looking at possibly trying to do some other things and looking at some different story ideas. Are we allowed to talk about that a little bit?
Because it ain't happening anytime soon, so let's do it.
You said they're not happening anytime soon?
No, like I don't have the resources right now, but let's go ahead.
Yeah. So it was funny because I got to see that firsthand. You brought up and you were like, oh, I really love this. And you started constructing it. And then you went, oh, but I really love this. And you started constructing that. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. And then you moved on to something else. And I was like, okay, wait. But you always came back to Harlan. Like, It was almost like you're like, let's try this. I should really focus on Harlan. But this is really cool too. But I should really focus on Harlan. And it kept coming back until eventually I think you were just like, no, man, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do. Those things will have their times, but the time's not now.
Yeah, that's the thing is it all comes down to, like, there are other things I could do, but at what cost, right? I mean, I've already written different. I was when I started with CK, I was doing superhero comics, and there's a really cool supernatural slash, superhero concept that I really wanted to finish, and I actually tapped Dino, said, "Hey, let's do this. It's only a 3-part story. Let's do it." But then I started realizing, well, then every dollar I put into that project, every minute I put into that project, every day I put into that project is a day I'm not getting anywhere on Harlem Buck. And I know that I just simply don't have the time and the resources and the financial situation to allow me to just do whatever I want to. And so it starts to come down to like, am I willing to put Harlem Buck on a shelf for 2 years just so I could put out something for fun? Do I really want to do that? Because let's be honest, this is self-indulgent for me in a way. I'm doing a self-publishing so I can tell my stories. And you know me well enough that would I turn down an opportunity to take this to another level? No. I would seriously consider it and look at the options, and if I thought it was a good fit, I'd go for it. But the reality is, most of the time, I'm just telling the story I want to tell about the characters I created in the world that I created, and I want people to like them, and that's what I'm doing. And so, when I start thinking about those other ideas and get excited about them, that's all well and good. But if it costs anything from what I'm doing with Harlem Buck, then oftentimes it comes back to the fact that that's too steep a price to pay.
Yeah. And I really do get that. Like, I've had people go, "Oh, hey, do you want to do another series?" And I'm like, no, I'm not ready for that. I recognize right now that Belial and Welcome to the Void and Essence House and whatever else I'm doing, it's like, I don't want to head up anything right now. If you were going to hire me as a writer, I'll come out and do it. But I don't think that, like, there's a difference between writing a book and creating a book. Yep. When you create a book, that's your baby. You're going to publish that. You're going to take it all the way. But when you write a book, someone brings you in to write it, you can write it and then walk the fuck away and just be like, okay, cool. This has been lovely, but I need to go now.
Right. And even though for me personally, writing is not easy, on a lot of levels, though, it's the easiest part, which sounds really weird because it's freaking hard, especially if I got personal stuff going on in my life or I got distractions in my life. It can be even way harder to focus to actually get anything done writing for me. I see a lot of writers out there in the indie community that are way more focused than I am, that are way better at just getting their nose to the grindstone and making things happen. And for me, like, I got to just be in the right headspace to work. And so, like, if anything comes along and throws that out of sync for me, it can be a while before I can get myself back on track and recover and be doing, because I'm not content to just not crap out partly. Like, you've watched me do it. Like, now you have, is like, I'll get something going and I'm like feeling really good about it. And then I get really to a certain point and I'm like, I was feeling good about it, and it's not the typical insecurity shit that we talked about earlier that we all go through, right?
Yeah.
For a fact that I'm going, no, this isn't going to be a strong enough story. Like, I feel like I have a natural instinct when I haven't hit enough of what I'm trying to do. And that I've muddied the waters too much and I'm going, now I'm lost. Like, how do I even, what is this story actually about? Because I'm trying to do X and I'm trying to do Y and I'm trying to do Z, all in 24 pages. And something's got to go because it's making this a mess of an issue. And learning to self-edit. And then I don't mean, you know what I mean? I'm not talking about I's and T's and structural shit, but learning to edit and not put everything into your story is really hard to do, but absolutely fundamentally necessary as a writer to write good stories. If you put it all in there, if you put every scene, if you decide that every scene needs to be in there because you thought of it, sorry, dude, you're doing it wrong. And that's brutal, but it's true. There's a reason that there are editors. There's a reason that films get edited. There's a reason that books get edited. There's a reason that comic books get edited. We as writers will go down rabbit holes, or we will stray. Like, Tolkien is a great example of that. I know Tolkien is beloved. He is not a good writer, though. He is a great storyteller.
No,
world builder, but he is not a good writer. He's off on freaking, Mulberry Lane when like Main Street is over there, and you're like, where the hell are you going right now? I mean, he'll come back eventually, but I mean, he'll meander way off onto stuff that fundamentally does nothing for the story. It's interesting because Middle Earth is interesting. It's interesting because he has a great setting with interesting themes and characters. But to the story itself that he's telling, a lot of stuff he does is completely irrelevant to the main story that he's writing. In a modern setting, you can't do that.
Yeah. So just to let everyone know, we're at the hour mark. Move on if you want, or you can keep watching us. We got full moon features coming here on Indie Event. We're just going to finish this conversation up real quick, and then you can either watch this or you can move on to the next one, whatever you guys decide. That was a really good point. I was with you for most of that. We did get a question. Do you think that on doing the first comic, it's better a graphic novel or a 3-part story? I mean, I think that personally, something like that, like having something that's enclosed and has a beginning, middle, and an end is a really good idea. It can even be a one-shot. It's not a terrible idea, but I think starting on an ongoing, which is what both of us did, we both recognize was not the most brilliant move ever.
Right.
That's a fair statement.
Yeah, you want something you can finish and get out to your audience. Yeah. And like I said, the only reason I got away with this is my stuff's episodic. So in a way, I kind of cheated. Like, in that it allows me to do a little bit of both. But no, as an indie self-publisher, doing things that you can package and sell as complete stories is going to be a lot better model to follow, financially and productivity-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to let Scott tell you all about himself. So, Scott, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and what's up with you?
All right, so once again, Scott Weldon, writer and creator of Harlem Buck Free Sword, which I self-publish under Weldon Studio. You can find us at weldonstudio.com. That's where you can find the actual comics. I also am on Instagram at Weldon Studio. On Facebook, I have a Weldon Studio page, or you can follow me. My personal page is Scott Eos Weldon, and I pretty much just talk comics and geek most of the time. Other than, under these trying times, I've deviated a little bit. But for the most part, I try to keep it geek-related.
And I am your dude, Chuck Pino. I'm a writer-editor. You can find my comics at Bonfire Press on Facebook. You're very welcome, Mark. You can also find Belial Comic on Facebook. You can find me, Chuck Pino, on Facebook. The name's right there. You can find me on Twitter at ChuckyPin. You can now find me on Instagram. Chuck Pino on Instagram. I know that's nuts. And I would love it if you guys checked out my Chuck's Raw Reviews. If you're already watching this on YouTube, then you are watching Chuck's Raw Reviews. But if not, come check it out. I talk about comics that I love, review them, and tell you all about them. If you guys have any questions about the nuts and bolts and processes of making comics, feel free to hit me up. Or you can go bug Scott, too. He likes talking about that stuff, too. Maybe meet him before you jump into his DMs because, we all get a little wary. But we would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate you. And Indie Event, thank you very much. We really had a good time. Take care.